I learned with sadness recently of the passing of my friend and one of the resistance fighters, the retired Colonel Ahmed Kashillingi, a quiet and modest officer. For some of us, anyone, and I repeat anyone, who fought, supported, participated, led, and bled in the resistance wars of the 1980s and 1990s to liberate our country remains one of those people, whether senior army officer, civil servant, or peasant. Any of those remains a shining example for our generation, regardless of the passage of time, regardless of the changing circumstances, or even some of the mistakes made by a few in that generation. After all, many of these people were young, they were impressionable, but they became both good followers, because you can't lead unless you are able to first follow. They also became good leaders of a great cause for their time. They had limited exposure, they had limited resources. Many today, in our time, haven't yet measured up to this prime example of patriotism of the Kashillingi generation. We are still a work in progress. When I look at our people, our generation, we're still a work in progress. Even as the tides shift, our thoughts and our aspirations for the country, for the type of country we need tomorrow. I should say I was first introduced to Colonel Kashillingi by retired Major John Kazora some time back. And since then I kept helping the late Kashillingi whenever he called and when I could, in whatever way necessary, out of respect of what Kashillingi and his colleagues stood for in the 1980s. I never feel tired of giving whatever I have in my hands and my time to that generation. I wasn't even aware that he had been unwell. We had not talked for about 4 months since I heard the time that his father had died. The last time we spoke and walked together with the late Kashillingi was on the trek from Garamba to Birembo in January of 2020, before the COVID-induced lockdowns. He was with his colleagues, General Tumwine and General Pecos Kutesa, who have since passed on, which for me is a chilling reminder that this glorious generation, which brought us a sense of sanity at a time of a failing country, they are fast leaving us. And we should do whatever we can to ensure that we can retain memory of their example and take out the good and use it for what we need tomorrow. Kashillingi in this trek told me about the third attempt at Kabamba Barracks, which began on December 23rd, 1984, ending in the victory of January 1st, 1985. He told me he had stayed firm with an 800-strong force, that kept with the chairman of the High Command at a place called Kakali in Dwanilo sub-county of Kiboga district today. This force would later take a place called Katemakali and Rwamagari in order to confuse the enemy about the actual planned attack on Kabamba. They were performing psycho ops on the enemy. I think the president has described this in his writing, in his books, a lot more than I can say about it. So Kashillingi said they would later cross to Lukora, joining up at Birembo in Kakumiro district with a larger force. He was a good and committed warrior till the war's end. Now on January 6, 2020, at about 2 p.m., in the heat wave, I can still feel it in my mind and can see it. The heat wave of that afternoon, after a long walk, we took shelter under a very large ficus tree, Omtoma tree, Mutuba tree, opposite what looked like, I remember, like a sub-county headquarter buildings. just below the hills of Katera, at a place called Ndira Weru. Ndira Weru is an interesting term. I eat from outside. I don't know why you would eat from outside. Either you like the weather or there's danger eating from inside. The place is called Ndira Weru. So that afternoon, under that shade of that ficus tree, the late Tumwine, who seemed to sweat so little in the sun, he was now relaxed and in a reflective mood, and he asked those of us who had gathered under the tree to give him a local language, a word to describe the hundreds of young people, mainly born after 1990, who were now untiringly walking in the footsteps of the battles of the NRA on this trek. I quickly volunteered an answer. I had a verb in my mind for describing this group of young people. I had a verb in Runyachitara, and it is called eyochero. Eyochero means reinforcement in Runyachitara, in Runyankore. Oh, it didn't seem good enough for General Tumwine. Someone who I suspect in our audience under the shade was General Katumba. He added a Luganda term. He called it Eje Ezibizi. Eje Ezibizi. But even that didn't seem to catch on for General Tumwine very well. I think it was General Tema Awany eventually who came up with a much better fitting word that has kept on my mind since. He called the youthful trekkers in Luo, he called them Lutenkot. Lutenkot, which traditional Luo means putting your shields together in a battle formation to ensure that the darts of the enemy don't penetrate and kill any of the fighters. Beautiful word. Eh? He meant that both the young and the old on this trek had formed up a shield to walk in the footsteps of history. That word, I easily call it forward when I remember the spirit of unity and sacrifice that the Kashillingis and their generation exhibited in the execution of the NRA war. It was also a word that sums up my mood whenever I hear about the sad news of the loss of any ex-NRA fighter. This is because Lutenkot is a continuous reminder of the duty of each generation, which is that the future requires unity, and that unity is needed even more today than before, because we need a central collective goal for our country so that our young people can see the same dashboard with the old people on things that matter, so that we can carefully heal and grow into a prosperous country and never revert to the difficult past. So I feel sad that I didn't get a chance to sit with Kashillingi once more so that I could hear fully and record his own take of the resistance war and the post-war troubles that he ran into before he could fully resume normal life. It is always a good idea to hear people in their own voice, in the first voice, so that you don't hear from others. This is because we are a young country. We are fashioning out a ramp made out of sacrifices of this generation in order to forge forgiveness and to work out how to live together in spite of our differences. Yeah? The American diplomat, fellow, I think he's now almost 100, Henry Kissinger, says, and I quote, "Forgetfulness is sometimes the glue for societies that would not otherwise cohere." This is, you write history by forgetting and forgiving. So history is written for the young people by taking on the stances that that old generation did in order to give us a better country. So whatever mistakes, forget and move on. I hope someone has had the time to record Kashillingi's story firsthand. The Lord keep his example of sacrifice and rest his soul in peace. Thank you.